Absolutely devastated by this murder. We've been hearing from people who knew Aiden Fucci, his friends. They are juveniles, so we have not shown their faces or their names, but we've been hearing quotes from them in the testimony that they've been giving, that he had said many, many times that he was practicing maneuvers with a knife. He wanted to kill somebody in the woods. He wanted to stab them. He had different names for a knife, the poker and so forth. It was all just extremely disturbing. But now, as we just found out, the teenager, Aiden Fucci, he was 14 at the time of Tristan Bailey's murder, has pled guilty from a not guilty plea. This changes everything in this trial that so many people are following, not just on our First Coast, but around the world as well. Renata De Gregorio has been following this very closely as well. And so let's go live to Renata. This was startling news here this morning, Renata.
Good morning, Jeannie. Yes, it was very surprising. There is still the sentencing hearing to come later on this month. As you said, February 23rd is when they will be in court. Again, the lawyer saying that that should be enough time for them to get everything together. We will expect to see some letters of impact. But we've been outside here, outside the courthouse. Not too many people have we seen, quite as many as we expected. A really full parking lot, tons of people heading in for jury duty, a lot of people to be wearing aqua, but we haven't seen quite as many as we had expected. This was a really, really anticipated trial, which now is not going to happen. But again, it was almost 2 years ago, and during that time, so much has happened through the community, and they've gone through a lot. And there's been a lot of emotional parts to this that people have really been trying to prepare for ahead of the trial. We've been saying earlier this morning that this jury that was going to be just 6 people instead of 12 were going to not only have to be completely impartial sitting on the jury, but they would have to be emotionally prepared because they were going to show nearly 50 photos from the autopsy, or photos of Bailey, excuse me. But now we will not see those photos most likely, and we'll have to see what's going on. But he has not taken a negotiated plea. So basically what that means is that the state attorney is going to suggest a lenient sentence of some kind or make a recommendation for a lower sentence. He is not getting that though. And we'll expect to see a lot of reaction coming in after this as well, because people were getting ready for this trial. It was a really big deal. If you think back to May 9th of 2021, just how many people turned out that Mother's Day weekend to look for Tristan Bailey when she had gone missing. It did not take that long until they found her. And there were many people. She was involved with the cheerleading community, her Infinity All-Stars, all of her family there. And so many people have been wearing aqua. The aqua, we believe, has turned up with the ribbons in the Durban Crossing community, yet again in support of the Bailey family, which calls themselves the Bailey 7. So we'll be looking out to reach out to those involved in this to see what their reactions are and how they are doing now with this news that Aiden Fucci, the accused murderer of Tristan Bailey, 13 years old in 2021, has now pleaded guilty, and what will come after that. Back to you in the studio, Jeannie.
Much appreciate it. We want to try to go now on the phone to our legal analyst, Shannon Schott, who is a defense attorney and also works a lot with juvenile cases here on our First Coast. Shannon, can you hear us?
Hi, Jeannie. Good morning.
Good morning. Does this surprise you?
It does. The state obviously has a burden to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. But at this point, what Aiden Fucci said is, I'm going to enter a plea in hopes that it will win me some favor with the judge when it comes time for sentencing.
And so how could that win him favor? What would be the change?
Well, certainly the anticipation in this case that Renata mentioned was the anxiety that goes along with any family in any community when you have the death of a child, the brutal death of a child, and all of those photos that were going to be shown in public. The St. Johns County Courthouse does not have the technology that the Duval County Courthouse has, and therefore everyone can see those photos when they are projected for the jury to see. So by avoiding that situation for the family and the community, that could certainly be what's called mitigation or good information for the judge to consider.
And how might that change his sentence?
Well, because he's a juvenile, he is facing a variety of different types of sentencing. He could be sentenced as a juvenile if the court determines that it's appropriate, or he could be sentenced as an adult. So that would be one factor for the court to consider when they consider whether or not to put him in some sort of rehab with jurisdiction until he's 21, or to sentence him to prison for potentially life.
But as we've been pointing out, there is no way it would ever turn into the death penalty because of his juvenile status. Is that still correct?
Correct. We do not execute minors in the United States of America. That is recent case law in the early 2000s, and a lot of cases out of Florida, but he is not facing death. He is facing life, and then there's special rules that go along when you sentence any child to a life or a term of years greater than 15 years.
So as your experience over the years working with juveniles and their families, what sort of conversation might his attorneys have had? I mean, why all the way to the day that the jury is about to be selected to enter this not guilty plea from the not guilty plea and not do it last week or in weeks prior?
Sources have told me that there was a full confession that we were going to hear from an inmate in the Duval County Jail. That was one of the witnesses who were listed. Whenever you're preparing for trial with your client, you are having all of those strategy conversations in the last few weeks, days, hours before court. And when you are most likely going to be convicted based on the admissible evidence, it's important to have that last-ditch conversation with your client about not wasting judicial resources so that the judge, when it comes time for sentencing, will listen to the arguments on sentencing, and rather than having to think about all of this terrible information and aggravation that came out of the trial.
And those are those mitigating factors that could lean a little bit better favor or give a bit better favor to Aiden Fucci at this point, you're saying. And were you talking about some of the statements that inmates have said that he was talking about using a knife and stabbing somebody in the face and being threatening in the prison environment? Is that something that may have led to this decision?
Absolutely. The question for the defense was always whether or not the state could prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And in the last couple of days, we've learned that there were certainly admissions made to some of his inmates, some of the co-inmates in the Duval County Jail where he was housed. The murder weapon was found, and there were several witnesses who were listed. And let's not forget, his mother was arrested in this case, and she could have very well been called to testify against him as well. So it sounds like he made a decision with his attorneys and his family that this was the best choice and the best course of action. But of course, he waived several legal rights that he was pursuing at the time of the sentencing.
And you mentioned his mother. I was going to ask you about that because, as we know, she's accused of washing the blood out of his jeans. She's accused of tampering with evidence. What does this do to her case now? Do you really think she might have been someone to testify against her own son?
Well, she certainly would not have the choice. There is no such thing as parental child privilege. She could have been called as a witness by the state, and she would have been compelled to testify or been held in contempt of court. So that could have factored into the decision for the family not to proceed. But whether or not she tampered with the evidence is independent of whether or not he committed the murder.
And let me ask you, too, you mentioned about possibly putting him in some sort of institution. That, by the way, this is the video of the mother you're seeing right there. But the question I was wondering about, this institution or some other, are you talking about some other place besides a prison for some period of time? Is there any other further mental health testing in the future now for Aiden Fucci?
So any juvenile who is incarcerated, there's two places where they can go. They can go to, well, three places. They can go to a county jail, they can go to a juvenile detention facility or a juvenile commitment facility, which is like a prison but specifically for children, or they can go to a Florida Department of Corrections facility that is also specifically for minors, because juveniles cannot have sight and sound interaction with adult inmates. So all of our different justice systems, including the Department of Juvenile Justice and the Department of Corrections and the local sheriff's offices, they have to separate juveniles from the general population until they turn 18.
And let me ask you as well, as far as his behavior in prison, we talked about that just a little bit ago, but also he's been in solitary confinement for many months now. And his side of the legal process, they've been saying that that's not healthy for him. As far as these mitigating factors that the judge is going to have to consider, are those going to balance each other out somewhat? Like, you've put this teenager in solitary confinement, it's driven him not literally crazy, but it's been a lot for him to handle. So maybe that's why he's acting out and threatening other inmates. Or how do you see the balance of those two things?
Whenever a child commits murder, there's certainly something going on physically, emotionally, mentally. And I think all of those things will be explored in the mitigation presented to the court in the sentencing hearing. And certainly the state will present all of the aggravation, the brutality of this offense, and the effect that it's had on the community. And there are certain factors that the court must consider when sentencing Aiden Fucci, because he is a juvenile specifically. But I anticipate we will hear some expert witness testimony about his state of mind and the devolution of his mental state being incarcerated and being in solitary confinement.
Okay, let me ask you just one more question, and then we will let you go. And we know you're going to be with us at our noon show on First Coast News to do some more analysis. You have a chance to digest this new information. But as far as what he has to say or not say on February 23rd, just quickly walk us through what is involved in that sentencing hearing that is going to be on February 23rd.
At the sentencing hearing, there will be a consideration of the mitigation, the aggravation. The judge will have certain factors that he will have to consider prior to being able to sentence Aiden Fucci to a prison sentence, or he will consider factors for a juvenile sentence. The court will weigh all of those things. Interestingly, remorse cannot be considered, or a lack thereof cannot be considered, unless Aiden Fucci decides to say something and express some sort of remorse. And at that point, the judge may be able to consider whether or not he's truly remorseful or not.
And Shannon, you may not have been able to hear it. It was difficult to hear the judge with the audio in that courtroom, but our producer telling us that they clearly heard him say just moments ago, this is Aiden Fucci, I'm sorry to the Bailey family and to my family. So perhaps he is planning some sort of statement of remorse at that hearing coming up on February 23rd.
And that's very possible, and that may have been one of the strategies discussed with his attorneys, is to finally show remorse and, I don't know how else to say it, beg for forgiveness, and hope that he can be free one day. I think that a lot of people in the community, the Bailey family included, would not want that to happen. And so there will certainly be arguments made on both sides. But as the victims, pursuant to Marcy's law, the Bailey family will have a very, very strong voice in the sentencing hearing.
And we actually haven't heard them speak publicly since her funeral. And but it was beautiful at her funeral. The 7 strong faith, strong family, such support from the community. And of course, all of us respect the fact that they haven't wanted to speak about this publicly since then. And we'll just have to see what they decide to do as time goes on. But Shannon, we appreciate your help very, very much. And we'll get more of your legal analysis from your experience and your expertise coming up on First Coast News at noon. But you've been seeing pictures there of Tristan Bailey, and in her remembrance, people who knew her say she was a ray of sunshine. Still hard to absorb, and for all of us who are mothers and parents cannot imagine the pain that that family still feels. But the big news right now, the breaking news, is that Aiden Fucci, the teenager accused of stabbing to death Tristan Bailey in St. Johns County, her body found on Mother's Day weekend, on Mother's Day itself, changing his plea from not guilty to guilty. So the trial, as we thought was going to happen, the jury selection today is not going to happen, but there is going to be a sentencing hearing at 9 a.m. on February 23rd. We'll find out more from our legal analysts on First Coast News at noon and our team of reporters covering this breaking news. We'll take you back to the program you were watching. Thank you for joining us on First Coast News.
This has been a First Coast News special report.